process and the neurosequential model of therapeutics, which is, I got through it, which is a tool designed for helping traumatized children. Jim has been working medium, this is probably 13 years now, I've probably had this a year, and finds great pleasure in working with spirit. He has sharpened his own mediumistic and psychic abilities by studying with internationally known mediums. He teaches mediumship development twice per month, and his ability to engage spirit began at a very young age, but he did not build on these abilities until later in life. Jim is one of our ordained ministers here of the Church Live in Spirit and is also a member of the Lilydale Assembly. And I gotta say, Jim's one of our ordained ministers that have stayed active and vital with our church and helping out. I think you've spoken just about every year. And this summer, he's going to be one of our summer speakers, so I'm so excited for that. And he's an excellent medium, and you'll see that later on. And a friend, so Jim, Flynn.
Hi. Good morning, beautiful day, huh? A little cold, but sunny, right? Nice. So it's great to be here, and thank you, Nancy, for that. That's a beautiful introduction. She reads it, I'm like, oh, is that me? Really? So it is kind of odd to hear yourself talked about like that. So it's very, very nice, very humbling. Thank you. I am going to talk about the greatest teacher today. That's going to be, if I had a title, my talk, that's what I would call it. So if you just, for a second, just close your eyes, and when I think of, when I say the word teacher, what do you picture? So we'll just give it about 5 seconds. What do you picture when I say the word teacher? So you may have seen an actual teacher. You may have got the visual of a teacher in a classroom. You may have seen someone like me at a podium giving a lecture. You might have seen a guru, right? Like a spiritual guru that you follow, or it could be a mentor in life. It could be an array of persons. We also know that you may not have pictured a person at all. And I'm going to talk about the two kinds of teachers, the person type and then the type that's not a person today. But in any case, you probably deferred to someone who gave you skills to decode the world in some way. And, they did that in a different way. You could have had the classic teacher where you were thinking, oh yeah, I got all my academic stuff, from, I'm going to say Mrs. Kerber because she comes to mind for me. If you're listening, Mrs. Kerber. She was a fantastic English teacher. But we may also have gotten things from people that gave us hope or guidance at difficult times. They may have been very supportive to us when we needed it. And those are all our teachers too. And when I sat there and when I picture somebody, my sister Lucy comes to mind. She is my older sister by about 15 and a half years. And if I say 16, she gets mad. So we say 15 and a half every time. I've been well schooled on that. And the reason she comes to mind is because due to that age gap, when I was born, she really kind of helped parent me. She was on board from day one. And she told me a story recently of how when she had to go off to college, and I don't remember this, I was like 2, I guess. And she said I couldn't leave, I didn't want to leave because I just knew, I had great parents, but she just felt like she was part of that. So I came back, lived at the house till I was about 8. I was sick a lot as a kid. She was an English teacher too, so she's a literal teacher. And she did a lot of tutoring with me too, because I missed a lot of school and caught up. And so as life goes on, you kind of sometimes run into arguments, disagreements as you're growing old together. And we had those too. And we grew from those, because I always say you learn from the good stuff, but you learn from the things that might at the time seem negative as well. And so we had those moments, but we've always come out on the good, loving, right side of things, I like to think. She's especially given me some teaching moments in the last couple of years. She has had a really hard road. Less than 2 years ago, diagnosed with a very aggressive form of cancer, had chemotherapy, recovered fairly well from that, but it made her weak. So she fell, went to rehab, kind of got back on her feet again, fell again, broke her hip. Another rehab stint. During that stint, diagnosed with Parkinson's. So it has been a really rough year for her. And she had to sell her house, and she's living in an apartment above a funeral home, of all places. There are a lot of jokes about it, trust me. But I won't tell them here. But I had left on a visit, and you know, when you see someone, she lives about 2 hours from me, and when you see them in person, you just get a different picture than when you're talking on the phone, right? And so it just occurred to me how isolated and how like she's just kind of confined to this. She can't drive anymore. And I was talking to her on the phone, and I said, Lucy, I just felt really sad. I felt bad for you. And she goes, oh, I don't look at it that way. And I said, how do you look at it? And she said, well, I think I'm really lucky. I was able to get out of my house. I had this man here who saved this apartment for me, and it's a big apartment. I can get around. I can afford to have nurses' aides if I need them. Like, she just went into all the positives. I had you and Finley come visit me, and I've got all the support. And I thought, wow, now there's a lesson, right? I mean, I was getting a real life lesson there. And I generally do have a positive attitude, but there was so much stacked against her, and I was like, that's just amazing that's where you are with all this. So again, a big lesson from her, and that's why I say she's probably one of my greatest teachers. I've been really fortunate to have a lot of them in the human form. But I do want to talk about another kind of teacher today too. And I'm going to call this teacher the unwanted moment. That's when, the name says it all, right? That thing that comes into your life that you really weren't asking for or looking for. I just named a bunch that happened to my sister, right? And I think that the good thing about this is that it does teach us to be stronger, more resilient, if we can transcend it, right? If we're able to kind of move through it. I do think there's spiritual growth that can happen from it. I also think the thing that's difficult about it is that if you're in a classroom, you have the teacher gives you the lesson and then you take a test, right? That's how it always works. And with the unwanted moment, they give you the test first, right? And you're sitting there going, oh my God, what am I supposed to do with this, right? What am I supposed to learn from this? What am I supposed to glean? And so that's what I think, one of the things that's so hard about the unwanted moment. We get the test first, and then are trying to figure it out. But like I said, I think in the long run, if we can transcend it, it makes us better spiritually. I always think, they'll say, oh, someone is so spiritual. And there's a part of me that initially reacts to, well, what does that mean exactly, right? When you say someone is so spiritual. And I guess if I were to have to defer, I would be thinking of that person that were really calm and always kind of said the right thing at the right time. They were regulated and kind of a peaceful type of person, I guess. But I think more so what really marks spirituality in someone is their ability to kind of move through those unwanted moments and to go through the process, right? It's not that you're going to snap your fingers and be like, okay, I've got this, but there's always a process with that. So I think that when that unwanted moment comes in and it feels like it's going to disintegrate us, that person who's got the spiritual wherewithal is the person who can kind of integrate it into their life and not let that thing wreck them. And I'm still working on that one. That's not easy, right? It depends on what it is, right? Some things you move through pretty quickly, and other things it's like, oh, I got to chew on that for a while, right? So the other thing that comes to mind with the unwanted moment is it's typically the idea is that it presents us, it just kind of puts in our face that here's how you want things to be, but here's how they actually are, right? There's this gap. And I think until we can move into that, how things actually are place, that's where, well, for me anyway, that's where I get caught up, right? But it was like this. I want it to stay like this. And so, having said that, I think there's some lessons that come out of the unwanted moment. And I'm just gonna name like 3, but I'm sure there's a lot more. We probably could, if we were to get people going with a brainstorm, we probably could get a lot more. The first lesson that I think is that the lesson that change is inevitable. That this moment comes in and it's changing things, right? It's changing the script. And at first we're like, no, I wanted this thing to be here the way it was, and I wanted it to be that way forever, right? And it just doesn't work that way. Nothing in life is fixed. Be grief, success, health, whatever it may be, right? We get twists and turns in life, and we don't have control over those. And so if I kind of get stuck in the idea of, I want it to be this way, and it isn't, but I want it to be this way, you're going to end up being pretty bitter, right? Because you're not going to be able to move into the present moment. And that's the unwanted teacher just kind of tells us that all this work is done in the present, right? We can't live in the past, or kind of, I guess it doesn't hurt to look ahead and have a goal, right? But we can't live in the past and dwell on that. We want to be able to move on. I know for me, sometimes the way this has presented is, and I think we probably all had this experience where somebody maybe that was our good friend we grew up with, and as we got older, either we changed or they changed, and things just don't gel like they used to. And in fact, it might even be that as we've gotten older, we don't get along. And I know that has always been a hard thing for me to let go of, right? Because I want to cling to that, all those good times that we had, and I want to remember things that way. Yet at the same time, it's like, it's not how it is anymore. So I know for me, sometimes that's been hard to let go of. And I think this idea is, with impermanence, I know the monks are coming and they talk a lot about, letting go of attachments, that ability to be at peace if you can let go of attachments. And I think this is part of what that is. I call it the lesson of impermanence, that nothing really stays the same. The second one is the lesson of surrender, and I think that kind of goes with the lesson of impermanence, so they're kind of connected. And because in order for me to move on, I do have to let go of the idea that it's not how it used to be, right? And I think for some people, and for me, that we confuse surrender sometimes with defeat, right? I had to give up. I'm a quitter, right? That kind of thing. And that's not the case at all. I mean, sometimes you have to surrender so that you can live in peace, right? If I'm in a relationship with someone that is toxic to me, it's not going to benefit me to hold on to that. I can let go of that, and I can wish them well, and I can give them my blessings, but I'm not going to give them a ticket in the theater next to me, right? That's not going to work for me. And so I know a lot of times it feels like, oh, I wish, that, especially in the case of maybe someone who's drinking, oh, I wish I could have helped them quit drinking, or I wish I could have helped them quit smoking, or I wish I could have helped that 8-month-old, eat those peas. But the bottom line is that I have to surrender to that kind of stuff. That's a different path, and it's not mine to fix. And I'm not defeated. I think surrender actually, it teaches us that it's like the end of useless conflict, right? It's with that person or within ourselves, the conflict can be created. And I think when we surrender, it ends that conflict that isn't benefiting us. So in the moment, right, it's just about, again, stop arguing with reality and start working with it instead. So the third thing, and the last thing I'll kind of talk, not the last thing today, but the third lesson is, you're not off the hook that easy, is the interconnection, or the idea that when kind of this difficult time comes to us, it's important to have support and to reach out and to kind of remember that, I'm not an island. I know I tend to like to, I'll just get through this myself. I don't want to burden anybody, or it's a sign of weakness if I have to ask for help. And it doesn't really, I'm finding over life, it doesn't really always benefit me to be fiercely independent. It benefits me to reach out to people, benefits me to get support. And I think that's another thing that this moment can do for us, right? If you look at something like Alcoholics Anonymous, that's exactly how it works, right? People get sober and they can't do it alone. They can do it with a group, though, that gives them support. And so that's what I think this is all about, that we have to reach out to somebody, or maybe even it's to God as well, or to both, right? I know having a higher power helps as well. I know years ago, again, to just kind of talk about my stuff around some of this, is that I had my first relationship that I thought was going to be a very long-term relationship. It was a great relationship. And the third year in, the person was diagnosed with a terminal illness. And so, talk about the lesson of impermanence, right away, that there was not a cure at the time. And so we knew time was limited. And so you kind of have this thing happen where, I really had in my mind, this is good. My parents were together 50 some years, both my sisters up into the 40s, 50s with their relationships as well. And I thought this was what I was going to have too, that I was going to have this long-term experience. And I had to let go of that, and I had to let go of the things that kind of went with it. So kind of this idea about, okay, this is different and I got to surrender now. It's not going to be the same, right? There's not going to be any more hiking. There's not going to be, even a movie was difficult for this person to get through if we had to go to a movie. And, life changes. You now have a time where you're 1 o'clock in the morning driving off to the hospital in an emergency situation. And so I had to surrender all that old stuff. And it wasn't easy. It didn't happen overnight. I went to therapy and, got group support, did all that kind of stuff. So which takes me to the interconnection, right? I also sought out groups. And I was lucky enough that the person who was ill was very, very connected. He filled a church full of 500 people when he passed. And so all I had to do was get over myself and reach out, right? All I had to do is kind of say, you don't need to do this alone. And yet, if you've ever cared for someone, you can't do it alone. It takes a village, it really does. So I think what I got out of that, though, is, the idea, all those things. And it helped me spiritually as well. I remember at first I kind of said, I'm done with you, God. This, look what you did to me. And I had a really positive person in my life at that time. And she said, you know what, why don't you just say to God, why don't you just say, I don't believe in you right now, but could you please believe in me? And, so she tricked me, right? But it worked. It worked. And I clung on, I clung on to that, that idea that, okay, I am struggling with you, but I'm just going to think maybe you believe in me. And that got me through. So it was spiritual growth in the long run, not in the exact moment, but in the long run. And that's the thing, when I talk about this, it's always a process. It's very rare that you click your fingers and move through. The other thing that I think is effective about like these unwanted situations or these unwanted moments that help us grow is that it forced me to look inward. It forces us to look inward, and we might have growth that we wouldn't have gotten otherwise. I also know that when I'm in it all, I probably don't look at it this way. So it's one of those things where, again, part of the process is to kind of forget what we learned and you go through some grief at first. And then as you start to accept the reality of the situation, you're kind of able to frame things in a way that's beneficial, I think. Forced me to look inward. And I do think sometimes too, if we live these lives, and who wouldn't want a life where everything is smooth all the time, right? That would just be wonderful. But that's not what life does, right? There's definitely moments. But I know for me, like even with my job, when I don't have stress on my job, I get comfortable and I can get lazy and I don't learn anything. And then that's when I make mistakes. And I think life can be like that too, that if everything comes really, really easy, it's easy to get comfortable. And then what do you really experience or learn? Just throwing that question out there, right? So in other words, when the path gets blocked, when we have difficult things, it kind of helps build our insight. And that's good, right? We learn how to find peace. I also found a quote from Rumi. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the poet Rumi. And one of the things that he said was that the wound is the place where the light enters. And I thought, yeah, I did that too. I went, I did, I did that too. I kind of went, wow, true story, right? Nobody likes the wound, but it's nice to get the wisdom, right, from the light. So that was, as I was researching this, that was something that popped out for me. So kind of as I'm closing, if I had to reach a conclusion from all this, I would say you have to embrace the instructor. So of course, it's easy to embrace that human teacher, right? Oh, look at all they did for us. This is great. It's hard to embrace the unwanted moment, even though it is teaching us something, we hope. So the other thing to remember is we don't ever want to seek out unwanted moments in an attempt to grow. That would not be smart. That would be kind of dysfunctional in a way, right? So if we're in that pattern, that's a whole other talk. But unwanted moments will find us. And I always say that, that the thing will present itself to you, I believe, if it's something that you're supposed to learn. And that's hard to swallow sometimes. So I say it, but I have a hard time swallowing that sometimes, but it's true. So so the unwanted moment will always find us. I think it will. We don't need to look for it. And if it does find us, there's not always an option to avoid it. I think too, what I've learned is when I have avoided it or tried to avoid that thing that presents itself to me, I try to go around it instead of through it. It just keeps presenting itself to me in a different form till I work through it. And sadly, I wish I could avoid, and sometimes maybe, but history has told me that if you don't work through it, it's just going to come around again. So the next time you face a challenge and you're kind of feeling like life is beating you up, or there's a huge interruption to your life, just try to see it as life itself, right? There's that phrase, life happens. There's a much more crude phrase that I can't say in church, but we'll just go with life happens, right? And we got to sit with that, right? Life is it's a master instructor. And there's things that it teaches me that I could not learn any other way. I truly believe that. So the greatest teacher, although could be human, is also this unwanted moment, because it forces you to discover what's been sitting quietly within you all along. It's not that you didn't have it. I think stuff sits within us, and that moment just brings it out. So hopefully, if this was helpful, if any of you are struggling with something, or if an unwanted moment is currently hanging out with you, hopefully this will be a bit helpful as we move forward. So God bless you all, and thank you so much for listening to me today.
I love that, the unwanted moment. Good lesson. Thank you, Jim. And I forgot about your humor.